Am I in that dream where I get up to the pulpit and I don't have a sermon prepared? I have that dream about 4 or 5 times a year. I wonder if this will finally vanquish it. Well, thank you for all your questions. Such a nice big stack. And of course, we won't have time to get to all of them, but I'm going to keep them and use them as I prepare sermons over the coming months. And so that's an enticement to come regularly, because you just never know when your question will pop up in my sermons. So let's see, what's a good one to start with? How about something light? What happens to our soul after death? I've got this. Actually, I was with a group at a dinner party in Colombia, a group of my husband's family members who I had not met before, and they had just heard that I'm a minister up here in the States, and they asked me a few questions. One, how big is your church? I said 850. They said, oh, so it's small. I thought, okay, evangelical tradition over there. And then they also asked me what happens to us after we die. And I said, I don't know, what do you think happens? Because Unitarian Universalism. And the truth is, of course, none of us really knows, right? How could we know? But we can have some hunches, for sure. And I'll tell you personally a couple of things that really resonate with me, knowing that there are other ideas out there, and that's okay. One thing that resonates with me is the idea that what we're made of is not destroyed. It transforms into different versions of energy and matter, but it doesn't go away. So I find that very interesting. And I tend to think about death kind of like the image of a raindrop falling back into the ocean. Not gone, but just one, right? For me, that's a really meaningful way of thinking about it. I also acknowledge that we can sense the presence of someone we love after they've died in some really powerful, amazing ways. And I don't know how that works with the ocean, but I know both things feel right. Both things feel real to me. I would love to hear some of your thoughts sometime about this. All right, let's see here. Here's one from a member in our branch congregation in Socorro. They sent this ahead of time since they wouldn't be here in person. They wrote, "What is spirituality anyway? I've heard it defined, perhaps by you, as the feeling of connectedness to the larger universe and to humanity. If it is a feeling, does it take its seat in our mind next to other feelings, like feeling of empathy to another human in distress, feeling of outrage at a person causing another human distress, feeling of satisfaction at a job well done, feeling of repletion at the end of a hard day's work, feeling of contentment in the midst of friends and family, feeling of love for sharing one's life?" And this person concludes, "If so, what is its relation with these other feelings? Or if it is qualitatively different, what is its connection with these other feelings, the mind in which they arise and the brain in which that dwells?" I happen to know who this is. It's a very scientific, very wise person. And I love this question. It's such a rich question. First of all, it's possible that I've said spirituality is the feeling of connectedness to the larger universe and to humanity. It sounds like something I might say, but it's not the thing I usually say when I'm defining spirituality. Usually when I define spirituality, I start with, if you're alive, and someday you're going to die, and you're capable of contemplating those facts, then you've got some spirituality, that contemplation, because it goes back to the question, so what does this mean, right? So what? That's the spiritual question. Did you know, so what? That's the spiritual question. Yeah. So what does this mean? So spirituality, the way I define it, is about meaning making. And the feelings that this person lists, feelings of empathy, feelings of outrage, feelings of satisfaction, can certainly be part and are part of a meaningful life, a life in which we have made meaning. And in that way, they are certainly spiritual feelings. I also agree that for most of us, what is meaningful is that sense of connectedness with something larger than ourselves and with the rest of humanity. And these feelings have to do also with that sense of connectedness. So I think what a rich question, and I'm going to keep that one also for future contemplation. How do we heal our divided nation? And there's one right after it. How do you balance outrage and love? Right? These go together. How do we heal our divided nation? Well, our nation has always had deep, deep divisions in it. And it's very divided right now. Much of our division has to do with not everyone being seen as human. And we can do this on both sides of a divide, right? When we see each other as people, when we understand each other in a very deeply human way, we can seriously disagree about positions and politics, but there won't be that same level of fear of annihilation, right? Because when we understand each other as humans, and it goes both ways, we don't want to annihilate each other. And I think a lot of the division is there's a deep, deep fear of not enough or of annihilation in it. And of course, I have very strong feelings about policies and all that. And underneath it all, the work of connecting with each other as human beings is ultimately the work that's going to help us bridge that. That's what I think about that. There were a lot of variations of how do you balance outrage and love. There was, let's see if I can find one. So we can find another example of it. They were great, so relevant. Here's one. The world is really messed up. When I try to resist, I end up full of anger and hate. Yet ignoring it and living my comfortable life is not an option for me. So how can I stand up against the greed, bigotry, and lies, yet still keep love and peace in my heart? Well, isn't that just what this place is about, right? We need to engage these things in order to have meaningful lives, right? In order to bring our spirituality into our whole lives. And we also need beauty and play and laughter and joy. There was another question in here about balancing living the good life with living in a world with so much suffering. And it's a similar kind of question about how to be with it, right? I think if you flip that question around, it's about how to be with it. We have to do what we can. We have to combine with others, be organized, because alone we're truly helpless, right? But together we can do quite a lot in the face of big problems. And we have to allow ourselves time for joy. I remember a trip to Amsterdam I took a few years ago, and I went to the Anne Frank house. And of course, that house represents the worst of human suffering in many ways, the worst kind of human suffering. And so I toured it, and I was really, really struck by two things. One, in her diary, which many of you are familiar with, were so many words about joy and beauty and gratitude and hope. And the other thing that struck me was in her bedroom, where she stayed, on the wall, it was still decorated just the way she left it, which is to say there were pictures of movie stars pasted onto the wallpaper. Because we need joy, and we need things that are beautiful and things that give us hope and make us feel lightness. And those things are not qualities of privilege. They're something that we all need, all of us need. Likewise, in Kenya, where I went to visit some sister congregations, I remember driving along the roads, rural roads, many of them unimproved roads, a lot of them Obviously, a lot of poverty around the sides. And something that's really popular in Kenya is little roadside stands with used clothing for sale, secondhand clothes, and there'll just be a huge array. And so you would see people at these stands selling clothes, and they would be decked out in a ball gown. Or you would see groups of children walking down the street, and it was clear that they were dressed for the sheer joy of it. I mean, there would be soccer shorts, and then there would be a prom dress and a tiara, you know. And there was just playfulness and fun, and enjoyment was obvious in that. So we all need play, we all need enjoyment, and we all need to care. We need all of those things to have a whole life. What part does Christianity play in the UU Church, past and or present? A huge part. Our roots are Christian roots. This is a Protestant church that no longer identifies as just Christian, which is to say, Unitarians were Christians, Universalists were Christians, and over the generations, they evolved in a different way. It's not to say we're more evolved than Christian churches, but we evolved in a different way. We evolved to see the scriptures as historical documents full of beauty, wisdom, and historical references and contexts, and errors, and contradictions, and all of it. And once Unitarians and Universalists started to think that way, it began to open the door to religious wisdom from other traditions. And so we gradually became more and more open and theologically diverse. There were huge controversies along the way, times when people thought, how can we even be a church if we don't all believe the same exact thing? And we got through it, and so now we count among our numbers Christians and Buddhist UUs, Jewish UUs, and people who are just UUs like me. I just grew up UU. I didn't come from another tradition. And everything else, Hindu UUs, you name it, Muslim UUs, atheist UUs, secular atheist UUs. We've got it all. We love it all. You're in the right place. Right. Yeah. And how do we do that? Because we don't need to think alike to love alike. That's right. Exactly. How should we understand the ideas of heaven, the promised land, the happy hunting ground? I actually don't know that one. That recur in many wisdom traditions. The heaven or the promised land. I really like the question Rebecca Parker poses. She is a UU theologian and a Christian UU theologian. She says, what if we are already living in paradise, but we're just acting as though we weren't? I think that is a great question. Likewise, I don't believe there's a different place called hell, but I do think we're really good at making hell here on earth. I think that this life matters. This life has value, and this life is where we should be working to realize that beloved community that we associate with concepts like heaven. How do we maintain hope in our terrible political times? I feel your pain, friend. Something about hope is it doesn't always have to be tied to a winning outcome, like a certain outcome. We can have hope without being attached to a particular exact outcome. I think of questions chaplains have in hospitals or hospices with people who are facing a terminal diagnosis, for example, and when asked, what do you hope for, might say, I hope I'm cured. And of course, that's a powerful hope. Another question you can ask is, and if it turns out that that is not to be, then what do you hope for now? Because we have a lot of layers of hoping that we can do. Powerful hoping. And hope can come from relationships and accomplishments in the near future, and meaning and beauty and experiences of mercy and forgiveness and all of those things can give us hope for what's meaningful in this life, even when we're not sure how hopeful to be about political outcomes, political processes, that kind of thing. And then we can take that hope out and keep working for those bigger things with it. Outer peace starts with inner peace. What can this congregation do to make us more peaceful on the inside? What a great question. I think I can't give you a complete answer to that question in just a few minutes, but one thing I think is important to know is that inner peace is something we experience and lose, and we get it back and we lose it, and we get it back and we lose it, and that is okay. I remember my Buddhist mentor saying, enlightenment can happen to anybody at any time. It's holding on to it that's hard, right? So if you are struggling, it's okay. And I invite you to follow Rilke's advice and that you heard in the prayer this morning and try to love the questions themselves. We've got time for one or two more. I like this one. What does our coffee hour or social hour spread, our snacks and beverage offerings, say about what we as Albuquerque seekers are hungry for? I wonder if we should start serving soul food at coffee hour. Is that what this is about? I feel like there's a hidden request in here. More chocolate. I'm not sure I have an answer for that one, but I encourage you to bring your favorite dish. How do you personally relate to the concept of God? I'll tell you, for most of my life, up to my 20s, was quite agnostic. And I would have said I was open to the idea of God, but it was something quite ephemeral, maybe just the spirit that keeps things growing, or it's love. And then I was in a time of discernment. I was in my mid-20s. I had worked as a doula, and I had worked as a nursing assistant, and I'd had a couple of babies by the time I was 22, and I was finally figuring out how to go to school. I finally figured out how to fill out the applications for financial aid, something that took me about 6 years to figure out and overcome. And I was getting more involved in my church, and I was wondering what I should do with my life, and it had never occurred to me to be a minister. I never would have thought of that. Yet I was asking my minister funny questions like, can you go salsa dancing when you're a minister? Which, in hindsight, seems like maybe I had it somewhere in the back of my mind, because he wasn't really the salsa dancing type, so. And then one day I was driving home from school, and I heard a voice that said, you're going to be a minister. And it was the weirdest freaking thing that ever could have happened, okay? And I know there could be many different ways of interpreting it, but it felt really clear to me that it came from something besides my mind, and that I should test that idea out and pay attention to it. And lo and behold, I became a minister. And it took about 7 years, and a lot of other things had to happen. Along the way, and there have been some rough times, I have also had the experience of really being held and pushed along and not let go of when I kind of maybe would have liked to be let go of, And I know some of you have had those experiences too. That's hard to square with my spirit that keeps things growing, God, but there it is. It just is. And I've also experienced times when that presence was very, very absent. And I know we can go decades without an experience of presence like that, or a lifetime. So I'm open to different interpretations of what that presence is or where it comes from. For me, having been raised UU with no other complicated ideas of God that I carry as baggage, I call it God. That's how I relate to it. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah.